Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jen, and welcome to another episode of Blockchain Banter, unpopular opinions, DeFi debates, and hot takes. We are going to go ahead and get started. Josh, I know that you have a hard stop in about 30 minutes, so hopefully DeFi Cheetah can join us. In the meantime, I'd like to go ahead and get started. We have Joshua Baker here, who is CEO of Aori, and we have Mark Richardson, project lead at Bancor on DeFi. Thank you guys for joining me up here today, and thank you to all of our listeners for coming out.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So I wanted to jump in. I'm going to pin a tweet to the top. Let's see. This was something by Dan Robinson that I had seen, and I thought it was an interesting sort of topic. We've talked about CLOBs before in some previous spaces and, throughout different discussions, not so much honed in on this particular topic here. Mark or Josh, have either of you guys seen this tweet?
I don't see it on the top yet. Which one?
There's nothing pinned yet.
Oh, there's not? Must be a delay. Okay, so basically it was, good morning, Dan. If you had a gun to your head and had to put a spot CLOB on chain, ideally Ethereum aligned, how would you do it? Oh, I see DeFi Cheetah. Hopefully he'll request to get up here and join us. And my thoughts are, well, my question is, what are your thoughts, first off, on putting a spot CLOB on chain?
Sounds a lot like Carbon.
Yeah, I think, it depends on what you mean by a CLOB. I think that with Carbon, we've kind of.
Mark, were you about to say something?
Oh, sorry. Can you guys hear me okay?
I can, yeah.
Okay. I think that
yeah, hold on.
Do you have a delay, Josh? Okay. I think it depends on what you mean by a CLOB. I think that for a lot of people, when they say that they want a CLOB, what they're talking about is access to the type of like sub-millisecond like time resolution that you would get on like a traditional, centralized database way of handling an exchange. And that type of fidelity kind of requires centralization. There's just no other way to handle information with that level of precision that could be done in a decentralized way. And so when people say they want to do a CLOB on chain, it's like, what are you even talking about, right? The block size on Ethereum is like 12 seconds, or the block time on Ethereum is 12 seconds. I think that it's a complete fantasy. If you want access to those types of markets, you have to sacrifice the centralization that you get on Ethereum and just go and use someone's centralized resource. To then bring a centralized resource onto Ethereum that doesn't have that time fidelity is kind of taking the worst of both worlds, right? It's literally combining all of the downsides from a centralized database with all of the problems of using a blockchain. So I think that it's, if someone was to achieve this, I think that it would be awful, right? Like it really doesn't have any advantages of being either centralized or being on a blockchain. I think that it's important to separate these two things out and not try to pretend that everything is automatically better now that it's on chain. In this particular case, I think that it would just make both the blockchain and the service that you're putting on it perform worse than if these two things were kept separated. But if you want access to, just limit order type functionality, we've done it in a blockchain decentralized sort of fashion with Carbon. It's okay to say that there are certain features that people want, and we want to build it in a way that is conducive to the way that blockchains are structured. But yeah, a CLOB is kind of the antithesis of that.
Josh,
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah. For the I think for the most part I agree with Mark. I just think I when it comes to like just going back to Dan's tweet, when it comes back to I'm just again I do think there is a world where, and this is kind of what we've focused on at Aori, which is specifically hybrid applications, wherein, when it comes to most decentralized applications, you're already, willing to take a level of centralization risk by using their front end, for example, which, if it's not the smart contract itself that they're manipulating, you're trusting that they're actually using the right smart contracts that they claim to be on the back end and whatnot. There's a level of like centralization that you're willing to accept by using their front end, for example. Um, I think I think taking a few steps further into like the hybridization of apps where, more and more features, for example, can be moved off chain, is what makes like on-chain collabs potentially interesting, as well. This is kind of like why I like 0x, for example, and it's kind of like what we're also trying to build, and like to an extent, why like my favorite thing Uniswap's done in years is Uniswap X, because I really do love the idea of like moving basically the matching off chain and then having the settlement itself on chain. So that allows you to be a little bit more flexible too than a CLOB. You can do things like order flow auctions, RFQs, last look as well. But yeah, that's maybe my kind of take on it. Yeah, it seems like Dan is obsessed with having everything on chain. Hence Uniswap. So yeah.
DeFi Cheetah, I'm glad that you were able to make it. I know that I think it was one of our original calls, the discussion was limit orders and AMMs. And I knew that you were a little hesitant to see limit orders on chain. Was it central limit order books specifically or limit orders in general?
So you mean central limit order book or decentralized AMM or?
What's your
Hello? Hello?
Wait,
Um,
yeah, we can hear you.
yeah, I can't hear Jen. I mean the.
Oh, yeah, no worries. Sorry, what were you saying?
I know. I can't hear the question.
Oh, okay. So maybe we were having the same issue. Do you want to try joining again? It's connection possibly.
Okay. Okay.
In the meantime, we can come back to that one. There was another thing by Dan Robinson that caught my attention. And in the beginning, we were talking about, how, and Josh, you just kind of mentioned it yourself, accepting a certain level of centralization in DeFi, right? This was something that we had spoken about on a previous call. And something that he spoke about was patents and copyrights in DeFi in the industry. Everything, was very pro 100% decentralized, at the beginning, and some very much are still. And we're very much pro open sourcing everything. And we're kind of seeing a slight shift. I'm going to pin his tweet to the top. Did either of you see that one by chance?
Oh yeah. And just to be totally clear, I completely 100% agree with him on this. Dan's an attorney for anybody who doesn't know. And the point he's making is not specifically around like copyrights even or like closed sourcing something. He specifically is talking about patenting. Maybe like a quick divergence for 1 second. This is actually kind of a cool thing for people to know this. You can patent code. It's kind of counterintuitive. The entire premise of a patent is that you're patenting a real world invention. And so how can text be code, or how can text be patentable? Is like a very prudent question. the Supreme Court has said that you cannot patent code, but every federal district court and consistently, or at least like several of the major ones, are consistently defying the Supreme Court's ruling and making judgments themselves that like create more and more loopholes around the Supreme Court's judgment. And so this allows people to still create patents effectively on code, which is just a huge it's almost like a violation of freedom in a sense, because it's not open sourcing is basically, I mean, even open sourcing with a closed source license, you still have the ability to like, see and use code and pay a royalty, for example, with some licenses. But with even with closed source, it's kind of understood that like you have some sort of proprietary code that if your competitors had, it would eat into your margins. That's completely understood as well. But a patent is like saying you can see the code, but I'm the only person that ever has the right to these magic letters being put together in the same way for 20 years, and no one else can ever write it down. So it's a bit like Orwellian. Yeah, I don't know if you guys have any other takes on that, but yeah, I'm not a fan.
Yeah, I come from so I disagree with Dan and with Josh on this. But I also come from a fairly different like background. Software development and software patents is kind of new to me. But I understand I do understand the sentiment, but I'm happy to offer a slightly different perspective on it. For those who don't know, I used to be an organic chemist, which is generally, it's very IP laden. You're basically creating compounds that can be very, very expensive to research and develop. And they generally have an intended use case. So something like in cancer treatment, for example, or whatever. Bioactive molecules, or things for labeling stuff for diagnostic reasons, or whatever it happens to be. And I think a lot of people kind of are under the impression that patents is something that's like weaponized by big pharma. And I guess in some cases that's true, but in general it's actually to protect the researchers. So for example, if I came out with a compound that treats a very specific type of breast cancer or something like that, then it's very important that if I had plans to commercialize it, that I seek intellectual property rights for it. And similarly to this idea that some combination of letters or whatever being arranged in such a sequence so as to affect some outcome. That the same is true of atoms, right? At some level, all intellectual property is about arranging stuff in a certain way, right? Like you can't patent, the atoms of iron that are composed into an internal combustion engine, but you can patent the arrangement of those atoms that compose the engine, right? And so to say that something is just an arrangement of other things that are going to infringe on someone's patent, it's important to realize that it's the use case and the reason why that arrangement is known that's being protected. And yeah, the way that the patent system is structured is generally to protect people from corporate bullying. So, for example, it's interesting for Dan Robinson's case, for example, that being a member of Paradigm and being so closely associated with Uniswap, which is very closely affiliated with the Ethereum Foundation itself, that they have an enormous amount of political power, and if they wanted to, they could just sit back and wait for others to create things, and then steal those ideas and pretend that it's their own. And you would notice that this is something that Uniswap has actually been accused of many times. Some of the biggest tweets that I saw trending after Uniswap X was released were these memes about sort of the Uniswap devs feeding VC sycophants these myths about the innovative nature of the products that they're creating when it's actually products that already exist. In that way, they're very similar to Microsoft back in the 1990s, where someone would create some piece of software, and the maneuver that Microsoft would pull is to basically release an update for Windows that would make their software package incompatible with the next line of PCs, and then release that same product that is compatible. And so the software patenting process is largely designed to prevent this type of behavior, where people that have a huge amount of political power or resources can't just cannibalize innovation that's happening elsewhere. And it's the same across the board. So like for someone, I remember in the early 2000s, for example, there's a company called Genentech that started patenting a whole bunch of human genes. And that was like really weird at the time. And the mainstream media would have you believe that somehow, these giant pharmaceutical companies now own the intellectual property rights to your DNA, which is completely overstated. It's just that what they actually own is the rights to develop products and industries and businesses around the information that's been garnered from studying those specific pathways. And this is important, right? One of the recent phenomena in pharmaceutical science is that a lot of researchers actually, they're much more interested in their sort of academic profile and aren't too entrepreneurial. And so even if they've discovered something really important, like a certain pathway blocker or something that might be of assistance in fighting some infectious disease or the progression of cancer or something, the tragedy is that in the rush to publication, to advance their own academic career, if they don't seek intellectual property on that compound, no one will ever use it. Because generally the manufacturing for these things is so expensive that, companies like Pfizer, like GlaxoSmithKline, they will basically refuse to invest in the manufacturing and distribution of these types of things, only to find out that one of their competitors is going to do something something with it in the immediate future. And so you end up with basically this Mexican standoff, where because there is no intellectual property rights for it, literally no one is going to invest in it. So there are lots of like life-saving medications that are now that will never reach the market simply because no one patented them. So there's there's this weird, I think, disconnect between how people view intellectual property and its its effect on developing businesses, and the actual reality of it, which is that it's supposed to it's supposed to create and foster markets. It's supposed to give people, an ability to protect their interests so that they can develop a product and sell it. And that's, I think that's just as valid in software development, especially if it's an invention that might be much more closely aligned with something like fintech. Like I kind of agree that, it does seem unhelpful if someone develops a piece of code and shows it to everyone else that they can't use it. And this is I think missing the point. It's not that you're not allowed to use it; it's that you're not allowed to make a business out of it, right? So if someone develops like a very efficient sorting algorithm, for example, and they show me how it works and they have intellectual property on it, I could be like, wow, that actually is a super efficient sorting algorithm. Thank you. I don't mind if I use that in my day-to-day research or something like that. But if I then turn around and then use that in something like Salesforce where the data retrieval is now like 50% faster, because I'm now commercializing something that I didn't develop. That's where the courts take issue. It's not the actual use of it. You still have the freedom to do stuff with it that you want to do. It's just that you can't sell it without paying royalties to the person that invented it.
Well, wait, hold on. Just to play devil's advocate, like just to this might be the first thing we have a big disagreement on. That you just described a business license. You just described a business copyright license, which is much less restrictive than a patent on code, which is much more gray, but does exactly what you just said. It allows the code to be open source. Anybody can play with it, and you just can't monetize it without a royalty or at all. In the case of Unity 3, for example, with like the BUSL, I think this is like a big issue. Like even outside of the philosophy of patents in code, a big issue is like there's a ton of overlap with copyright law, because copyright law is meant to be for text or like unique writings and things like that with books and whatnot. So it fits much easier on top of code. The problem with patents as applied to text is kind of very similar to what Mark was alluding to. It's like there's a lot of confusing overlap with text, and in the case of like pharmaceuticals, I'm actually one of the rare people who does completely agree that like patents are good in physical world. I just think patents are really bad in computer science world because they lead to tons of confusion into like jurisdictional overlap between copyright and patents. And I don't know. I mean, like, look, if you're gonna be like if you're gonna open source something, but you still want like control over it, just use a business license. The law is way clearer. The law is way like more agreed upon by all courts, and patent software laws are kind of really up in the air still. So yeah, it's maybe my take on it.
Yeah, I think, and you're right. Like, it's kind of exciting that we did get to disagree on something for once. But then, so I actually agree with you about the BSL stuff. The problem is that BSLs are kind of weak sauce. Like you don't really get if someone encroaches on a BSL without royalties, it can be very difficult to prove what it means. So, for example, I think like one of the ones I was looking at not too long ago was about a fast graphics rendering system that was ported, I think, it was either Blender or like 3D Studio or something. And so this was this actually was under BSL. And so someone had developed it and wanted to license it to a bunch of different software developers to make their their 3D animation suites a little bit faster. And someone, I can't remember who was infringing. I need to dig this one up. It was only a few weeks ago, but someone had basically taken that exact process that was being used, and because they had used it in like a different language, like they'd basically taken the underlying mechanism, but because it was like originally written in C and they were porting it to a completely different programming language, they felt that they didn't infringe on the BSL. And this is where BSLs become very, very weak. Someone can very easily say that, oh, you named your variable this, but I named it this, and so now it's different code. Or, you performed your operations in this order, and I'm changing the order and doing it this way, so, the BSL doesn't apply. And in general, courts don't know how to handle it. Whereas if you had a patent, it's a lot more airtight. So it's, if everyone was like happy to just play fair, I think that I would agree with you, right? The BSLs are perfectly tenable, very serviceable ways of doing stuff. But when it comes to someone who is deliberately trying to figure out a way to deny you the royalties or even just credit that you might be owed, BSLs are much easier to exploit.
Interesting. Yeah, if you find out the details, send me a link. I'm curious.
Yeah,
sorry,
I'll
Josh.
find it. Yeah, I will send it to you.
Josh, I know that you only have 2 minutes, so we'll probably go ahead and end it there so we don't go over and we're respectful of your time. But considering we have something that you two actually disagree on, I'd like to do maybe a to be continued on it. If Mark, you're going to kind of look into that a little bit and get back to us, I'd also like to know what the listeners are thinking in this regard. And we can continue this one next week before we pick up on a new hot take.
Sounds great. Yeah, and appreciate it a ton, Jen. Thank you.
No, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. And Mark, thank you also. I know we had to cut it short, but again, I would love to hear everyone's take on this. We actually have, let's see, somebody who's requesting to speak. So Josh, maybe I'll go ahead and bring them up. And if you do have to drop, I completely understand.
Yep, understood. Appreciate it.
And Mark, you're still good for a few more minutes, I'm thinking, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's see. We're going to bring Turtle Shell up here. Turtle Shell, thank you for joining us. Do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself? You have a question for our panelists?
I just joined a couple of minutes ago, and I really like to talk about and the differentiation between patents and in general copyrights. I don't have a specific question to that. Just wanted to share, a hot take on what I'm working on. But yeah, maybe if there's other people first want to go ahead with questions, then I would think that people should go ahead first.
No, that's okay. If you want to go ahead and you want to speak to the difference between the copyrights and the patents.
No, I don't have anything specific to add to copyrights, the difference on them. I'm not an expert in that field. Just, I wanted to share a little bit on what I'm working on, which is has something to do with EIP 7265, circuit breaker EIP. If some people might heard of it. I don't know what kind of, like, it's my first time joining this format here, so I don't know what is here the policy of, like, shilling or sharing what you're working on. That's fine.
Yeah, you know what I would love to do, actually? We have a call that I host on Mondays. It's called our Alpha Hour. It's every Monday at 5 p.m. UTC, and we always invite projects. We've got content creators, researchers, project leads, such as Mark, who's up here with us at the moment. I would love to invite you to join us on next Monday's Alpha Hour, and we'd love to hear what it is that you're working on specifically. We have a call that's kind of dedicated to that sort of thing.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And next time I'm going to write in the comments up front. But yeah, I will join definitely on Monday, and thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. But go ahead and send me a DM so I can be announcement is made along with the link to it. I can go ahead and send that to you directly.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. Okay, Mark, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to all of our listeners for joining us. We have a coffee break that I'm going to be hosting. Mark, you'll be joining me on that. It's going to be on the Bancor Discord. We do this every Friday at 4 p.m. UTC. We go over different trading strategies, things that are happening in DeFi and the ecosystem, in general, and would love to have you guys join. And we'll go ahead and continue the debate next week.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thanks so much. We'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.